Chapter 4. Wulf leaned against the wall, a tapestry cushioning his shoulders from the stone that was still cold, even though it was an interior wall. Despite this, his chin sagged towards his chest, and his eyes felt like he'd sprinkled sand into them. Wulf blinked hard, staring at the toes of his boots. One of the problems was that the castle was so quiet. He was so used to the bustle of the market square or the town streets. Even his breathing echoed off the opposite wall, and when he moved, his armor rattled loudly enough for an entire army. Wulf crossed his arms over his chest and tried to settle more comfortably against the wall. He didn't have to stay here too long, just until his hourglass ran out, and then he and the other guards would all rotate. A breeze whisked around the corner, seeping into the chinks in his armor. Wulf shivered and hunched his shoulders further around his ears. The high, eerie sound of whistling wind scratched at his nerves. Something about the stillness was making the hair on the back of his neck prickle. Another high-pitched shrill of wind whipped around the corner. He frowned, a thought finally worming into his slow, sleepy brain. Wulf snapped wide awake, his stomach twisting into a knot of anxiety even as he became fully alert. Wind seeping through the cracks of windows was normal. A full breeze in the middle of the night? Someone had left a window open. Why would a window be open? He gripped his spear and stepped around the corner. Sure enough, one of the large, latticed windows on the outer wall of the hallway had been swung open, latched into place on a hook in the wall. The wind whistled, making the tapestries in the room gently swirl back and forth in the eddy. He crossed the room, the thick carpet runner muffling his footsteps as he crossed the middle of the hallway, and glanced out the window. Cold, sharp moonlight outlined the roofs of the town below. Wulf unhooked the window and swung it silently back into place. He turned around and came face to face with an unfamiliar man. He stood near the opposite wall, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, body tense. Wulf could tell in a glance by the man's clothes that he was a farmer, probably one of the ones who worked outside the walls in the king's fields. "Where's the king?" the man demanded. Wulf took a step back and to the side, so he wasn't caught between the wall and the man. "What are you doing here?" The man followed him, drawing and brandishing a dagger. "I was told that if I got into the castle, that you would help me find the king. Now where is he?" Wulf thought of the long climb it would have been to get up to the window he'd just closed, and his stomach knotted. He held up a hand. "Who told you that?" The farmer's face twisted. "You might play a good game, Wulf, but we all know you've sold your soul to be the king's lackey. Tell me where he is, or—" Footsteps sounded on the stone floor behind them. Wulf lunged forward, snatching at the intruder. They grappled for a moment, and with a sudden, vicious twist, Wulf managed to get the knife out of the farmer's hand. It clattered to the stone floor. He hooked his foot behind the farmer's leg, tripping him to land out of arm's reach of the knife. The farmer kicked upward, landing a blow to Wulf's stomach. It clanged off his breastplate, but was still hard enough to throw him off balance. Wulf staggered back, felt the edge of a display stand catch his heel, and tumbled into an alcove. It was strangely, tensely quiet. Wulf rolled to his side, trying to find the farmer. Had the man run? Had he— Steps scraped on the floor again, and Wulf looked out of the alcove to see that someone cloaked in emerald green had stepped into the hallway. The farmer stepped toward the windows, brandishing the knife he'd retrieved from the floor. "Who are you?" Wulf knew. There was only one man who wore that shade of green. The king lowered his hood. "I heard you wanted to see me." He made a motion, almost hidden by the folds of his cloak. Wulf saw the flicker of a bright green gem on a piece of jewelry as the king slipped it into a pocket of his cloak, and the king began to change. Scales rustled and crackled as the king's robes disappeared, his legs melding and his arms shrinking into his sides, all of his body becoming smooth, shiny scales. Wulf recoiled, gagging as the overwhelming scent of musty leather swept through the room. The farmer, though he was white-faced with fear, still snarled and lunged forward, knife flashing in the moonlight. The short blade scored across scales, a terrible scratching noise filling the air. It left not a mark on the great serpent. The serpent lunged forward, coils of its body looping around the farmer. The man struck at the scales frantically, the knife scraping again and again over the scaly coils or glancing off the bony brow. And all the while, the snake tightened and tightened its coils around the farmer, until Wulf could hear the man's bones begin to crack. The man had breath enough left to scream once, the cry echoing off the walls, and then the serpent's fangs flashed as it buried them in the man's throat. Wulf wrenched his gaze away, hand over his mouth, now praying he wouldn't get sick and call attention to himself. He glanced back at his post and saw his spear, lying on the floor next to his shattered hourglass, both crushed under the flailing coils of the serpent's tail. He forced himself to his feet, glanced back to see what was left of the farmer's broken body disappearing down the snake's stretched mouth. That would be him next if he didn't move. He quickly picked his way over the thick coils, trying to get to his spear. Halfway across the room, his spear almost within arm's reach, something slammed into his shoulder, throwing him against the wall. Wulf pushed himself back to his feet, gasping at the ache arcing down his right arm and shoulder. The serpent hissed and lunged again. Wulf threw himself back, away from the snake, down the stairs. Over the sound of his clattering armor, he heard the chapel bell ring over the town. It was 2 a.m. His breath burned in his lungs as he ran full tilt through the hall, frantically trying to remember the route to the nearest door. Muscular coils lunged in front of him, blocking an open doorway. Wulf skidded. Hot breath and scales grazed against the back of his neck as he hurled himself through another door. He stumbled, caught himself against the wall, pushed himself back up to his feet. He staggered to a halt in the next room as he realized he could no longer hear the sound of slithering scales behind him. He turned. The dark hallway stretched back, empty, the only motion the stirring of tapestries on the wall, disturbed by his passing. The agony in his shoulder worsened, working its way down to his lower back. Wulf forced himself to take stock of where he was. Too high. He was too high. Any exterior door now would lead to a balcony. He had to get down another level. He forced himself to start walking as he yanked at the buckles of his breastplate, fumbling with his offhand. His right arm hung, numb from the shoulder down, at his side, and he could feel blood seeping down the back of his tunic. When he finally got the breastplate off, blinding pain drove him to his knees, a cry ripping from between his clenched teeth. Wulf leaned against the wall, feeling his shoulder. Blood flowed between his fingers from a long, deep wound across his shoulder blade. The serpent's failed strike had been hard enough to bend the edge of his breastplate, driving it into his flesh. Wulf focused for a moment, trying to think past the pain to the things he needed. Bandages, salve, a clean shirt, before... No. First, he had to get out of the castle. Wulf dug one elbow into the tiled wall, trying to push himself back on his feet. Through another doorway, he could see the cold, bright light of the moon. That scent of wet, musty leather warned him, but not quickly enough for him to dodge. A coil of rough-scaled skin lashed around his arms, dragging him backward. Wulf twisted, looked up. The king's face had elongated, becoming smooth and glossy, but he would have recognized those cold, bright eyes anywhere. Wulf curled his hands into fists, baring his teeth as he struggled to wrench away from the serpent. The king hissed. Was it laughter, or was that only Wulf's panicked mind? And suddenly darted forward. Wulf felt fangs sink into the side of his neck. He yelled and wrenched again, feet kicking against the heavy coils of the serpent. He could feel a cold, pinching sensation spread down his left side, numbing his arm and leg. The heavy coils of the serpent eased away. Wulf tried to kick at it as it retreated, but the numbness that he thought was due to the heavy, scaly body was spreading, slowly and inexorably, deadening his limbs on his left side. He pushed himself on his elbows, scrabbled backward and away from the serpent that was now coiling itself on the ground, the green eyes glowing brighter and brighter as darkness edged in across his vision. There was a weight on his chest, a cold, heavy, slick weight that was making it hard to breathe, hard to move. Underneath his hands, the floor changed from marble to rough stone, pocked and pitted by rain. Moonlight fell across his face. He was outside, on a balcony. He reached up, grabbed the edge of the railing, and with one last burst of strength managed to haul himself to his feet, his left arm and leg limp and useless. What do you think throwing yourself over the railing will do, guardsman? The words were thick, slurred, forced through an inhuman mouth that stretched wide, jaw unhinged. There was only one thought in Wulf's mind. He could not face the idea of being eaten like the farmer. He tried to snarl an answer, but a spasm gripped his throat, crushing his words. His body wrenched back, and he felt himself tip over the railing. suddenly weightless. A hard impact snapped his neck into his chest. Nothing.